He watched his wife choose another man over and over again and still blamed himself for leaving. She spent his birthday morning with another man. Not texting him. Not running a quick errand. Hours. Multiple hours, on the one day of the year that was supposed to be his, while he sat at home packed and ready, waiting for his own wife to show up. And when she finally walked through that door and saw his face, she already knew. She did not even try to pretend. She looked at him and said, out loud, the words that no spouse should ever have to hear. I don't know why I keep hurting you. Just like that. Like she had no control over it. Like it was happening to her instead of something she was actively choosing, over and over again. That sentence should have ended the marriage right there. But it didn't. And that is exactly what makes this story so hard to sit with. Let's go back to where this all began, because the birthday moment is actually pretty far into this story and there is a lot of ground to cover before we get there. This guy, we'll call him OP because that's what he is, was 25 years old when he first started noticing something was wrong between his wife and a coworker. Not a vague feeling, not insecurity without cause. An actual, specific relationship that was developing in ways that crossed a clear line. The coworker was not just a work friend grabbing lunch occasionally. This was someone his wife was forming a real emotional connection with, texting frequently, confiding in deeply, leaning on in the ways that people are supposed to lean on their partners. The energy that belongs inside a marriage was flowing outward, steadily, towards someone else. And OP could feel it even before he had the words to name it. That particular kind of loneliness, sitting next to someone you love and feeling them somewhere else entirely, is one of the worst feelings a person can experience. It does not announce itself dramatically. It just quietly hollows you out. The moment it became impossible to ignore was when the coworker asked her to go camping. Just the two of them. Alone. During a stretch of time when OP would not be able to join even if he had wanted to. Now, let's be honest about what that is. That is not a casual coworker hangout. That is not a group trip that happened to have bad timing. That is a private overnight trip with someone your spouse has been getting emotionally close to, deliberately planned for a window when the husband cannot be present. Think about what that planning requires. Someone had to look at the calendar, identify the gap, and think, this is when we can go. That level of intentionality does not happen by accident. If you cannot see the problem with that, I genuinely do not know what to tell you. OP made his first Reddit post about this, and the community responded pretty much the way you would expect. Most people saw immediately what was happening and told him in no uncertain terms. He had a long talk with his wife, and she agreed not to go camping. On the surface, that sounded like a win. Like communication working. Like a couple navigating a rough patch the right way. But here is where the story gets complicated, because OP himself admits something that a lot of people in his situation struggle to say out loud. He was in denial. The conversation happened, the camping trip was cancelled, and he told himself things were getting better. He wanted so badly for that to be true that he let the relief of her agreement stand in for actual evidence of change. He focused on what she said and tried not to look too hard at what she was still doing. And that is not stupidity. That is what love does to people. It makes you root for the best possible interpretation of every situation, even when the situation keeps handing you reasons not to. Oh, that word denial. It does so much heavy lifting in stories like this one, doesn't it? The reality check came when he went through her text messages. And look, I know there are people who will immediately jump to debating whether that was okay to do. But here is what I will say about that. He read those texts because something inside him already knew. You do not go looking through someone's phone because everything feels fine. You do it because your gut has been screaming at you and you are finally ready to stop covering your ears. That moment of picking up a phone and making the decision to look is not a casual one. There is a particular kind of dread that lives in that space between not knowing and knowing, and the fact that he went looking means part of him had already accepted what he was about to find. What he found was not ambiguous. It was clear, direct evidence that the emotional relationship had crossed into infidelity. This was not a gray area. This was not a misunderstanding. The texts told him exactly what was happening between his wife and this coworker, and there was no innocent explanation that could account for what he was reading. Whatever remaining hope he had been holding on to quietly collapsed in that moment. And that kind of collapse, the one where the thing you feared most turns out to be exactly as bad as you feared, leaves a mark that takes a very long time to process. So they went to therapy. Both together and individually. And this is one of the most important parts of the story because it shows that OP genuinely tried. He did not just blow up and walk out. He sat down with her, he committed to the process, he looked for a path forward. Week after week he showed up and did the uncomfortable work of pulling apart what had gone wrong, sitting inside his own pain long enough to examine it, trying to understand the mechanics of how two people get to a place like this. They talked about what had gone wrong, why she had felt the need to go outside the marriage, what each of them needed to make things work. More information came out during this time. More pieces of the picture filled in. Details that were probably difficult to hear, things he would not have been able to unknow once he knew them, and he absorbed all of it and kept showing up. That is not weakness. That is someone who took his vows seriously and wanted to exhaust every possible option before giving up on the life he had built. But therapy only works if both people are actually doing the work. And what OP needed from his wife was not complicated or unreasonable. He needed two things. He needed accountability. And he needed her to accept new boundaries. That is it. Those are the two foundational things any relationship needs to survive betrayal. You own what you did, fully and without revision, and you agree to operate differently going forward. Without those two things, there is no foundation to rebuild on. You are just pouring water into a cracked cup and wondering why it keeps emptying. She could not give him either one. The accountability issue is the part that I find most infuriating, honestly. Because it did not stay still. It shifted. It evolved. It got worse over time. At first there were moments where it seemed like she might be getting there, like they were making some real progress. But then it started sliding in the other direction. Suddenly she had not really done anything wrong. Then she reframed the whole thing as sexual harassment from the coworker, positioning herself as a victim rather than someone who had made choices. Think about how much mental work that reframe requires. You have to take your own active decisions and strip your own agency out of them entirely in order to arrive at that story. And then, most incredibly, she turned it around on OP himself, saying she was worried he would not be able to support her in the future if something went wrong. Read that again. She took the story of her own infidelity and somehow made him the one who needed to prove himself. That is not someone working through guilt and trying to do better. That is someone actively rewriting history to protect their own ego. And every time the story shifted, OP had to reckon not only with the original wound but with the exhausting experience of watching the truth get quietly buried. The boundaries conversation went about as well as you would expect. They talked about her friendships with other men, agreed on what needed to change, and then nothing actually changed. She seemed agreeable in the moment, nodding along, maybe even seeming genuinely willing in the room, and then just kept doing what she was doing the moment she walked out of it. Which is something a lot of people do when they are not genuinely committed to change, but they also do not want to face the consequences of admitting that. You say yes in the room and then leave no when you walk out of it. And for OP, each time that happened, it was another quiet confirmation that the words and the actions were never going to line up. But he kept hoping. Because that is what people do. Then came the birthday morning. We already talked about it at the top, but I want to sit with it a little longer because I think it deserves more than just a mention. He had the day off. She had the day off. She told him she had work to handle in the morning and would see him that evening for dinner. A reasonable, if slightly disappointing, way to spend a birthday. He accepted it. He probably made peace with it, told himself it was fine, maybe even distracted himself during those morning hours so the waiting would not feel so heavy. And then she spent those hours with a different man entirely, a new male friend this time, not even the original coworker. She came home to find OP packed and ready and clearly aware of what had just happened. He did not need to say much. The suitcase said enough. And instead of deflecting or making excuses, she said it out loud. I don't know why I keep hurting you. That sentence is haunting because it contains a kind of honesty that is almost more painful than lying would have been. She acknowledged the pattern. She named it. She showed that she could see exactly what she was doing to him. She just did not stop it. And that gap between awareness and action is sometimes the cruelest place a relationship can live. And then, as if one wasn't enough, came the concert situation. Another male friend. Another city. Just the two of them. Does any of this sound familiar? Because it should. It is the exact same structure as the camping trip from the very beginning of the story. A private trip, away from home, alone with a man her husband had already raised concerns about. The repetition here is not accidental. It is not a coincidence of circumstance. It is a pattern, and patterns like that one do not emerge without intention behind them. OP told her he was not okay with it. She did not go. But she was not happy about it. She was visibly upset, frustrated, treating the decision to stay like a sacrifice she was being forced to make. She was upset that she had to choose her husband over this other guy. That right there tells you everything you need to know about where her priorities were at that point in the marriage. I mean, déjà vu much is right. That is wild. It took longer than it should have, and OP is honest about that. He knows he stayed past the point where most outside observers would have told him to go. He went through therapy and arguments and shifting stories and broken boundaries and a birthday that should have been a celebration but turned into another moment of watching someone he loved choose someone else. He carried all of that weight, not dramatically, not in a single breaking point moment, but incrementally, the way people carry things they are not ready to put down yet. And eventually, he found his way out. Not through anger, not through a dramatic explosion, but through something quieter and more powerful. He chose himself. He decided that loving himself meant not staying in a situation that kept proving it could not give him what he needed. And that decision, quiet as it may have been, took more courage than anything else in this entire story. He is divorced now. And he describes the emotional landscape of that with a kind of honesty that I really respect. Some days are lonely and sad, the kind of lonely that comes from a life suddenly restructured around a single person instead of two, from empty space where routine used to be. Other days feel hopeful and free. He does not pretend it is all fine. He does not wrap it up in a bow and tell everyone he is thriving. He says he feels far from the person he was when this started, a little more confident, a little freer than he has been in a long time. And he is using this period to figure out who he actually is outside of being someone's husband. That is not a small thing. That is genuinely hard work. It is the kind of work that requires sitting alone with yourself long enough to remember what you actually like, what you actually want, who you actually are when no one else is defining you. Now let's talk about the best friend situation, because I think this piece of the story does not get enough attention. This friend knew everything. He was the one person OP had trusted with the full picture, through all of it, every shift in the story, every broken boundary, every therapy session, every awful moment including the birthday. He had been present for the entire arc. And when OP finally made the decision to divorce, after all of that, after everything, this friend told him he was making a mistake. Tried to talk him out of it. Pushed back at the exact moment when OP needed support and reassurance more than anything else. I want to be really clear about something here. There is a version of a friend who challenges your decisions because they genuinely care about you and want to make sure you have thought it through. That is a real thing that good friends sometimes do. But there is a line between that and undermining someone when they have already decided, when they have done the work, when they have suffered through it long enough to finally know what they need. What this friend did sounds like the latter. And that kind of betrayal, coming from someone you trusted completely, on top of everything else? That hits differently. It makes you question your own judgment in a moment when you most need to trust it. Here is where I am landing on all of this, and I want to be direct because I think OP deserves a straight answer. He was not naive for trying. He was not weak for staying as long as he did. He was someone who loved his wife and took his commitment seriously, and he gave the relationship every reasonable chance to survive. But the marriage was over from the moment his wife decided that protecting her own image mattered more than owning what she had done. You cannot rebuild trust with someone who refuses to acknowledge that trust was broken. You cannot move forward with someone who keeps recreating the exact same situations that caused the pain in the first place. And you absolutely cannot heal a relationship where one person is doing all the carrying. As for the best friend, my honest read is this. If someone pushed back on your decision to leave a marriage that had already put you through all of that, knowing what they knew, that is not a friend who was looking out for you. That is a friend who was more comfortable with the status quo than with your well-being. Whether OP cuts that friendship or tries to address it directly, I think he needs to ask himself one question. Does this person make him feel more like himself or less? Because right now, in this season of his life where he is actively trying to figure out who he is, he does not need anyone around who makes him doubt the one decision that was unambiguously right. He chose himself. Finally. After everything. He chose himself. And that is not a mistake. That is the whole point. I was a child actor and my parents quietly spent 94% of everything I ever earned before I could touch it. His parents looked him in the eye and let him believe those years of work, the auditions, the callbacks, the early mornings, the childhood he traded for a career, had added up to almost nothing. And he believed them. For years. Until he was 24 years old and finally got access to the account that had been in his name the whole time. What he found in there was not nothing. So here is the setup. And I want you to pay attention to the timeline because it matters a lot in this story. This guy started working as a child actor at 8 years old and kept going until he was 14. 6 years of his childhood spent working. Not playing, not just being a kid, but actually working in a professional capacity, earning real money, building a career. Think about what 6 years feels like when you are that young. At 8 years old you are still learning how to exist in the world, still figuring out friendships and hobbies and who you are going to be. And instead of having the slow, unstructured time that most children take for granted, this kid was memorizing lines, sitting in waiting rooms surrounded by other nervous children and their hovering parents, traveling to sets, performing on command, and doing it all over again. He was not dabbling. He was working. And the checks did not even stop there. He still gets small residual payments today, at 24, from work he did as a child. This is someone who put real labor into a real industry and generated real income over a long stretch of time. Now, there is a law in the United States called the Coogan Act, and if you do not know about it, here is the quick version. It was created specifically because of stories like this one. Jackie Coogan was a child actor in the early Hollywood era who earned an enormous amount of money and then discovered as an adult that his parents had spent almost all of it. He was one of the biggest stars of his era, a household name, and he came of age to find essentially nothing waiting for him. The backlash from that case eventually led to legislation requiring that a percentage of a child performer's earnings be set aside in a protected account that the child cannot access until they reach adulthood. The legal minimum is 15%. The idea is that no matter what happens with the rest of the money, at least some portion of what the child earned is preserved for them. It is a modest protection, honestly. 15% is not a fortune. But it exists because the alternative, which is no protection at all, produced outcomes too devastating to keep ignoring. So this guy had a Coogan account. 15% went in, it sat there, he could not touch it, and he eventually accessed it after college. Fine. That part of the system worked. But here is the number that stopped him cold when he finally saw his full earnings history. 94% of his total income from those years had been spent before he ever had access to his own bank account. 94. Let that sit for a second. He earned the money. He did the work. He showed up and performed and generated income from age 8 to age 14. He gave up weekends and summers and the ordinary rhythms of childhood to do it. And by the time he was old enough to even look at where it went, 94% of it was already gone. I'm sorry, 94%. I need a moment. Now, to his credit, and I think this is important to acknowledge, OP is not immediately assuming the worst. He understands that a portion of that money likely went toward the career itself. Acting classes cost real money. Transportation to auditions and shoots costs real money. Headshots, agency fees, wardrobe, coaches, all of it adds up in ways that people outside the industry might not immediately appreciate. There are legitimate expenses that come with being a working child actor that a family has to absorb, and sometimes those costs are substantial. He is not pretending those did not exist. He is not walking in with a sledgehammer demanding every dollar back without any context. He is simply doing the math and recognizing that those costs, even generously estimated, do not come anywhere close to accounting for 94% of his total earnings over 6 years. There is a gap between what a reasonable career expense looks like and what the numbers are actually showing. And that gap is not small. It is not the kind of gap you can chalk up to poor record-keeping or fuzzy memory. It is large enough that he cannot just explain it away and move on. He also has a good relationship with his parents. He is not describing people who were cruel or neglectful in other ways. He is not saying his childhood was miserable or that they were cold or dismissive or that anything else felt wrong. He is not saying they did not love him. By every other measure, this appears to be a family that functions, that communicates, that cares about each other. Which actually makes this harder in some ways, not easier. Because when someone you have no other reason to distrust does something that, on paper, looks like financial exploitation, you have to hold two things in your head at the same time. The person you know and love, the parent who showed up for you, who was proud of you, who was there at the auditions and the callbacks and the long shoots. And the thing the numbers are telling you they did. That is an incredibly uncomfortable place to live inside your own head. Here is what I think is really going on emotionally for OP right now, even if he has not fully articulated it this way. He is grieving something. Not just the money, although that is real and the practical impact of it is real. He is a 24-year-old dealing with rent and student loans and the relentless financial pressure of early adulthood, and knowing that there was more there, that there should have been more there, makes every tight month sting a little differently. But beyond the practical loss, he is grieving the version of his childhood that he thought he understood. He worked hard. He earned money. He trusted that the adults around him were handling it responsibly, because he was a child and that was what children are supposed to be able to do. And now the bank statements are showing him a different story. That kind of realization does not just feel like a financial problem. It feels like a loss of something that was supposed to be safe. It feels like the ground shifting slightly under something you had no reason to question. The fact that he is still getting residual checks today, small ones, means the connection to that chapter of his life is not even fully closed. Every check that arrives is a small reminder of those years, of the early calls and the long drives and the work he put in when he was barely old enough to understand what work really meant. And now every check is also a reminder of the question he cannot unask. Where did it all go, and why did no one ever tell him? This part really gets me. The dues on his SAG-AFTRA account had been building up for 5 years and nobody told him. 5 years of delinquent dues that he did not even know about, sitting there, accumulating quietly, blocking his access to his own account in an industry he had actively contributed to as a child. He had to find out on his own. He had to pay them off out of pocket. And then he had to sit down and go through old bank statements himself, piecing together a financial picture that no one had ever offered to show him. Nobody sat him down when he turned 18. Nobody walked him through where the money had gone or gave him any kind of accounting. Nobody offered a conversation, a summary, an explanation, an apology. He had to go looking for the truth and then figure out what to do with it once he found it. Alone. Look, I have to be honest here. The combination of that detail and the 94% number is really hard to interpret charitably. So what should he do? He wants to have a conversation with his parents, and he wants it to feel productive rather than explosive. And I think that instinct is right, not because he owes them a gentle approach after all of this, but because if he actually wants answers, a confrontational blow-up is less likely to get them than a calm, direct conversation. Anger can be completely justified and still be tactically counterproductive in the same breath. What he needs going into that conversation is clarity about what he actually wants from it. Is he looking for an explanation, a real breakdown of where the money went, category by category, year by year? Is he looking for acknowledgement, some recognition from them that this was not handled the way it should have been, that he deserved more transparency than he got? Is he looking for some kind of repair, financial or otherwise? Those are different goals and they lead to different conversations, and walking in without knowing which one he is pursuing makes it easier for the conversation to dissolve into emotion without ever arriving anywhere useful. What I would tell him is this. He has every right to ask. He has every right to want a clear accounting of what happened to his earnings. The Coogan Act exists precisely because this kind of thing was so common that lawmakers had to step in and force a minimum protection. The fact that the law only required 15% to be protected means that the other 85% was legally available to his parents to spend. Legal and right are not the same thing. Just because they were allowed to spend it does not mean spending 94% of a child's earnings on things that were not that child's established career expenses was the responsible or ethical thing to do. He should not let a good relationship or a fear of awkwardness stop him from asking a direct question about his own money. He earned it. As a child. Over 6 years. He deserves to know what happened to it. And his parents, if they are the people he clearly wants to believe they are, should be willing to sit down and give him an honest answer. If they get defensive, if they deflect, if they tell him he is being ungrateful, that response will tell him something important too. The conversation is worth having. The discomfort is worth tolerating. Because on the other side of it, no matter how it goes, he will know more than he does right now. And right now, what he knows is just enough to make him feel the loss without fully understanding it. He deserves better than that. So drop a comment below and let me know which story hit harder for you. And if you want more content like this, a like and subscribe would mean a lot.